In the ruthless, unforgiving wastelands of Fallout, survival is the only law, and in a world where civilization has crumbled, in which everything is out to kill you, survival means embracing the darkness. Nobody understands this better than the Raiders, groups of cutthroats and criminals, each shaped and hardened by their own little corner of the wasteland. Some are little more than chem-addled ruffians driven to a life of reaving and torture either out of boredom or necessity. Others run sophisticated criminal operations, while some even manage their own minor civilizations. Welcome aboard everyone to this Lore Tours flight, where today we'll be taking a closer look at the various raider groups found in the wastelands of Fallout. Now, the only thing that truly unites them is their desire to take that which is not theirs and kill anyone who gets in the way. So it should go without saying, please do not leave the ship at any time during our tour today. Our insurance really doesn't cover the cost of a trip to Paradise Falls to get you out. And with that little safety announcement out of the way, let's begin our tour. Our first stop on this perilous journey is none other than the Boston Commonwealth. Compared to some other regions, the Commonwealth fared a bit better in the face of atomic war. Many of the pre-war settlements and cities, while scarred by time and conflict, remained somewhat functional. Places like Diamond City, Bunker Hill and Goodneighbor serve as an oasis of civilization amidst the chaos. But these pockets of civilization exist within a vast, lawless expanse, hidden away amongst a patchwork of city ruins and hidden facilities. Now, the majority of these gangs are little more than ragtag groups of lightly armed lowlifes and criminals. With the society of the old world in tatters, these mindless thugs fall in line behind a single leader, usually the strongest and most brutal member of the gang. They raid small wastelander settlements and wage a brutal gang war against fellow raiders, as despite attempts to unify these gangs under one banner, their greed and infighting keep them as a fragmented coalition of independent squabbling forces. Some of these gangs have found a common cause. The L&L gang are a loose coalition of 6 raider gangs united by their hatred for the Institute, those clandestine boogeymen who plague the Commonwealth. And these raiders take a particularly sadistic pleasure in rounding up and executing simps. Next we have the Forged, based out of the Saugus Ironworks. They are one of the toughest and most brutal gangs in the Commonwealth. Led by their power-armored leader, Slag, these raiders are obsessed with fire and metal. To join their ranks, recruits enticed from nearby villages and rival gangs must pass an initiation ritual that, for most, is too hot to handle. They wield heavy flamers, brutal metal sledgehammers, and wear armor fashioned from metal plates. Mercy is a foreign concept to the Forged. Punishments for even minor infractions can range from branding to mutilation, or execution by means of being fed molten iron. Now if we sail up the coast for a bit, we'll reach Mount Desert Island off the coast of Maine, home to a particularly nasty bunch of madmen known as the Trappers. Once humble fishermen and hunters looking to exploit the bountiful wildlife of the island, these poor individuals were driven mad by the dense radioactive fog that blankets the island, becoming little more than a band of insane cannibals, their minds changed by the relentless radiation. As we circle back past the Commonwealth, let's make a quick pit stop just west of Boston, at everyone's favourite fizzy fun wonderland, Nuka World. And here we'll find the rare site of an actual raider alliance of 3 powerful raider clans. Though alliance is a generous term, it's more of a tenuous non-aggression pact born of necessity. When a raider named Coulter united 3 distinct and violent groups with the goal of taking over Nuka World, fortifying it and using it as a base of operations from which they could raid the rest of the Commonwealth. The most vile of these groups are the Disciples. Psychotic thrill killers, they enact their sadistic desires on anyone they encounter, decorating their hideout in Fizztop Mountain with unspeakable gore. Living by a creed of kill or be killed, just don't get caught. These raiders prefer knives over guns, allowing them to get up close and personal with their prey. The operators, on the other hand, are a fairly sophisticated bunch as far as raiders go, led by the brother-sister duo of Mags and William Black. They resemble an organised crime outfit more than a gang. Originating from the upper stands elite of Diamond City, the operators prefer making caps over needless violence, making them one of the more rational groups you might encounter, always willing to strike a deal for the right price. Lastly, we have the Pack, a simpler primal group that follows the rule of survival of the fittest. Their leader is the strongest of their number, the alpha of the pack, a title constantly up for challenge. Dressed in elaborate, colourful animal-inspired outfits, they may look playful and silly, but don't be deceived. They are ruthless, running the Nuka World slave trade and feeding their captives to their menagerie of beasts. For our next destination on this tour of wasteland scum and villainy, we'll be heading on down the east coast to the grim and gritty depths of the Pitt. Once the bustling industrial city of Pittsburgh, the Pitt is now a hellscape of metal and concrete, heavily scarred by the bombs of the Great War. What wasn't obliterated in the initial blast was enshrouded in a thick, irradiated smog. This toxic haze is a nasty concoction of nuclear fallout and pollution, courtesy of the pre-war factory complexes that once powered Pittsburgh's industry. This noxious environment has given rise to a unique threat for the residents of the Pitt, the troglodyte degeneration contagion, or TDC. This horrific condition mutates and deforms those exposed to it, turning the wastelanders into insane wild men or the inhuman feral creatures known as the Trogs. As the populace succumbed to this degenerative contagion, the city itself descended into chaos. It became a nightmarish battleground where murderers and sadists hunted one another. Order seemed a distant memory until a Brotherhood of Steel recon team stormed the city, purging most of the gangs and scavenging any valuable technology. However, one Brotherhood member, Ishmael Asher, was left behind, and where others saw ruin, Asher saw potential. He seized control of what remained of the mad, mean and murderous raiders, uniting them under his iron-fisted leadership. With his Brotherhood training, Asher transformed these deranged raiders into a somewhat disciplined army. These raiders, clad in protective gear to shield themselves from the Pitt's smog, defend their territory fiercely. They maintain the walls of the Pitt against both outsiders and the monstrous Trogs, all while venturing further into the industrial wasteland, gathering supplies and acquiring more slaves to work in their factories. Asher's vision doesn't stop at mere survival though. He aims to restore the Pitt to its former industrial glory. The raiders scavenge and repurpose the remnants of the old factories, producing ammunition, weapons, and other critical supplies. This self-sustaining nation is slowly but surely emerging from the ashes, ready to expand its influence and unite the wasteland under Asher's banner. We're heading to the capital of Raider Mayhem now, the Capital Wasteland. Once the shining light of democracy, the Capital Wasteland is now a land ravaged by the Great War. As the seat of government, it was hit hard by the bombs, leaving much of the area as rubble. Necessities are hard to come by, and the grandest of civilized settlements you'll find here are a leaky old aircraft carrier and a shanty town built around an unexploded bomb, because nothing says home sweet home like a ticking time bomb. It should come as no surprise that this land of scarcity has produced some of the most vicious and barbaric raiders you'll find anywhere in the wasteland. These raiders decorate their bases with body parts and wear dismembered limbs as part of their armor. They're a ragtag bunch of similarly minded psychopaths, teaming up when it suits them, but showing no particular loyalty even to their own members. They inhabit rundown houses, city ruins, power stations, just about anywhere they can find really. Their territories are marked by colourful graffiti and their unique sense of decor. The largest raider settlement is Evergreen Mills, a well-defended factory nestled in a canyon. It boasts its own shopping bazaar, bar, shops and brothel, serving as a hub for all raiders in the area. They even keep a super mutant behemoth as a sort of grotesque pet. But the Capital Wasteland also has some other notable groups. those who have organized themselves enough to run their own nefarious enterprises, or at the very least, name themselves. Take the slavers, for instance. Operating out of Paradise Falls, a rundown strip mall, the slavers have been in business for years, with many being second or third generation slavers. They lead raiding expeditions on weaker settlements like Big Town and Little Lamplight. They force their slaves to work hard manual labor, serve as muscle, and endure even worse fates. They're even willing to sell slaves to those looking to free them, if the price is right, of course. Then there's the Family, a tribe of raiders who have turned to cannibalism to survive the harsh, barren landscape of the capital Wasteland. Based out of an underground sanctuary east of Arefu, they're bound together by their craving for human flesh. Cast aside by society and branded as monsters, these outcasts under the leadership of Vance have tried to curb their hunger by modeling themselves after mythical vampires. They now try to rely on drinking blood instead of killing, making them a complex and somewhat sympathetic group. For something a little bit more quaint, we have Sudden Death Overtime, a smaller group of DC Raiders. These 4 hockey mask-wearing thugs, led by goalie Ledoux, seek to revive the ancient sport of ice hockey, which they believe is a sport where ice gangs fought each other in a bloody spectacle in front of thousands. And more recently, after the activation of Project Purity, a new gang has emerged, known as Split Jack's Bandits. These metal armor-clad raiders saw an opportunity in the flow of purified water across DC. They raid Brotherhood of Steel water caravans and extort local settlements, quenching their greed as well as their thirst. We're going to venture now into Appalachia, where we'll find some of the earliest known raiders. Appalachia spared from much of the direct destruction during the Great War due to its isolation and lack of strategic targets. Initially maintained some semblance of order with a functioning government and a group of responders helping to keep the peace. However, not all was well, especially for those stranded high in the mountains' ski lodges. By the winter of 2078, these affluent pre-war holidaymakers became snowed in and were stripped of their wealth and power, reduced to fighting and killing each other for scraps of food. By the time these survivors were discovered by the Wastelanders of Greater Appalachia, they had devolved into a coalition of 5 ruthless gangs. Among the earliest and most notorious of these were the Cutthroats, led by the ruthless David Thorpe. The Cutthroats were known for their brutality, infamously destroying the town of Charleston by detonating a mini-nuke at the Summersville Dam, causing what would become known as the Christmas Day Flood. Merry Christmas indeed. Then there were the Blackwater Bandits, who became some of the stealthiest and most skilled thieves in the Wasteland. Unfortunately, their knack for self-preservation was less impressive, as they met their end when one of their own accidentally flooded their base at the Blackwater uranium mine, with something that they couldn't sneak away from: radiation. The diehards were unique amongst raider gangs for their reluctance to kill innocent wastelanders, preferring less violent means of theft and intimidation. They were a rare breed indeed, trying to survive without resorting to extreme brutality, as demonstrated by their peers. The Trappers, on the other hand, were some of the finest hunters in Appalachia. They honed their skills hunting wild game, and setting traps for unsuspecting wastelanders. Sadly, they met their demise in an ironic turn of fate, when a gang of super mutants descended on the group and the hunters became the hunted. And finally, there were the Gourmands, a grisly bunch based out of the Bolton Greens private school. These cannibals preyed on passing caravans and nearby settlements, abducting wastelanders and bringing them back for their Mr. Handies to prepare as meals. Their group began to unravel when their leader, Morris Stevens, started consuming other members, leading to his eventual exile and transformation into the first recorded Wendigo. All of these groups met their end either through their own misfortunes or the dreaded Scorched Plague, unleashed by the remnants of the pre-war American government, the Enclave. This plague ravaged the land, turning life forms including most of the remaining Appalachian Raiders into mutated, violent minions of a greater hive mind. By 2103, thanks to the efforts of the Vault Dwellers from Vault 76, the scorched threat was greatly diminished, and new groups began to move into the region, drawn by rumours of a fabled treasure. Among them were smaller raider gangs like Edwin's gang, led by Edwin and his niece Ronnie, or Sargento's gang, slavers running a slave trade business and fighting pit out of the Watauga Civic Center. Larger gangs also appeared, such as the Free Radicals, originally convicts from the Western Maryland Correctional Facility. They were freed by the head guard and led to Appalachia in search of treasure. Upon their arrival, they eliminated a group of super mutants at the West Virginia Lumberyard, which they promptly turned into a fortified base. The Crater Raiders, founded by members of the pre-scorched Diehards gang, returned to Appalachia with new recruits around this time too, establishing a base in the remains of a crashed space station of all places, calling it the Crater, much more impressive than a rundown old lumberyard. And then we have the Blood Eagles, led by a trio known as the Blood, the Eye, and the Claw. They are believed to be a motley group of pre-war biker gangs, conmen, and drug addicts, and they have risen to become the largest hostile force in Appalachia. Their brutal methods, however, have made them outcasts even amongst other raiders. But don't be fooled, they're highly sophisticated, employing an army of hacked assaultrons, Mr. Gutsies, power-armoured troops, and even tamed Mirelurks. We're heading out west now, but before we reach our final stop, we'll take a quick detour to the stunning Zion Canyon. This isolated land, untouched by the direct blasts of the Great War, remains a near pristine wilderness. But Zion Canyon is home to one of the most brutal and feared raider tribes in this region, the Whitelegs, and these chaps are certainly not the sort you'd want to bump into on a hiking trip. The Whitelegs were formed from the lucky few locals and tourists visiting the Salt Lake City area from Europe at the time of the bombings. In the ensuing chaos, the survivors banded together, and whilst isolated from the rest of the world, developed a primitive tribal society. This tribe, like many in the region, created their own unique language, blending English, European, and Native American languages. They held a high level of superstition with a particular aversion to entering pre-war buildings, and they covered themselves in white chalk to camouflage themselves in their native territory, allowing them to move like ghosts through the canyon. But don't let their primitive appearance deceive you. The Whitelegs are incredibly bloodthirsty. This brutality was exploited by Caesar's legion, who enlisted the Whitelegs to butcher the settlement of New Canaan. Now for our final stop, we're in the infamous Mojave Wasteland on the borders of New California. This western region of the post-war United States, dominated for much of its history by the New California Republic, is home to some of the most powerful raider factions in the Wasteland. The NCR, with their expansionist policies and powerful military might, have tried to bring order to the chaos. But of course, the Wasteland had other plans. Raiders here have consolidated into some pretty formidable factions, and the most noteworthy of these raider gangs can trace their origins back to the very same vault that gave birth to the NCR itself. Vault 15 was the site of a social experiment where individuals of radically diverse ideologies were set to be kept together for 50 years. Overpopulation and deteriorating conditions, however, led most residents to strip the vault of its resources and venture out into the wastes. Some founded settlements like Shady Sands, the foundation of the NCR. Others, however, split off into 3 distinct raider gangs. First, we have the Jackals. These craven murderers are the least sophisticated of the Vault 15 raiders, overwhelming small groups of wastelanders with superior numbers, and taking off with their spoils. They're a chaotic mix of thieves, scavengers, and madmen. Next, we have the Vipers. Led away from Vault 15 by a dweller named Jonathan Faust, the Vipers settled in an oasis around a pit of mutated vipers, where Faust claimed to have made a Faustian pact with a mysterious god to sacrifice wastelanders to the snake pit, but in reality he was likely just driven mad by snake venom. This gang use weapons laced with venom and conduct night raids on settlements, capturing sacrifices for their snake gods. They even ingest a mixture of alcohol and venom to test their worthiness. And then we have the most successful of the West Coast raider gangs, the Khans. These marauding warriors believe in the rule of the strong over the weak. They're akin to a biker gang crossed with a Mongol horde, roaming the wastes in small scouting parties and powerful war bands. The Khans were essentially wiped out after capturing Tandy, the daughter of Shady Sand's leader, when a lone vault dweller was sent to slaughter them, leaving just one sole survivor who briefly rebuilt the gang as the new Khans. Despite their resilience, they were ultimately destroyed by a descendant of the very same vault dweller that destroyed the original Khans. As the NCR expanded, it purged its lands of raider gangs. The Jackals were reduced to a disorganized band of petty thieves. The Vipers, nearly eradicated, lost their old ways and now reside in the mountains of Nevada. However, the Khans were reborn as the Great Khans, led by Papa Khan, who relocated them to the Mojave. In the Mojave, the Great Khans built a sophisticated drug manufacturing empire. However, they faced significant threats, first at the hands of Mr. House and his reformed tribes, then during the NCR's offensive known as the Bitter Springs Massacre, where many innocent Khan women and children were killed. While allowed to resettle in peace, the Great Khans are now a shadow of their former selves, resorting to mercenary work to survive. But they're not the only raiders under the Mojave sun. One of the more recent raider groups is the Powder Gangers, prisoners of the NCR Correctional Facility, who are used as forced labor to rebuild the railway line between the Mojave and the Los Angeles Boneyard. These resourceful prisoners, however, made use of a distracted NCR and copious amounts of blasting powder found around their facility to blow open their cages. They now raid caravans and plunder nearby towns from their prison base. The rundown settlement of Westside is home to two small-time raider outfits, the Greasers and the Scorpions, but the real power in the ruins of Outer Vegas are the Fiends. This rough pack of raiders are addicted to nearly every chem imaginable and run roughshod over Outer Vegas. And despite their relatively few numbers, they are a significant thorn in the side of the NCR. Their nearly impregnable stronghold in Vault 3 has allowed them to remain a threat in the region, despite the NCR's numerous attempts to eliminate them. And now, as our journey through the Wastelands draws to a close, it's clear that the harsh, brutal life of this world has left an indelible mark on every raider we've encountered. From the isolation-induced primitive savagery of the Whitelegs in Zion Canyon, to the rebellious Great Khans, each group has been shaped and hardened by their own little corner of the wasteland. The unforgiving environment forces everyday people like you or I to adapt, often in the darkest ways imaginable. Some are driven to a life of chems and stealing by the barren world they have grown up in. Others, when presented with a rundown theme park or a grand industrial facility, form an elaborate criminal empire out of the ashes of the old world. And as powerful groups increasingly dominate the wasteland, what does the future hold for these bands of raiders? In a world that constantly changes, will they adapt to new challenges or continue their savage and anarchical ways in the face of their eventual extinction? After all, survival in the wasteland demands evolution, and those who fail to adapt will undoubtedly perish. What do you think? Which of these raider groups would you most like to sign up with? Let us know down in the comments and make sure to subscribe to become one of our frequent flyers. And remember folks, the voyage of discovery never truly ends. Keep your eyes on the stars and your heart set for adventure. We'll be ready to welcome you on board again soon. Catch you next time.